Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I am so happy to have Nina Badzin speaking with us all about friendship, writing, and podcasting about friendship. And Nina and I have known each other for maybe over a decade now, right?
I think so.
And let me tell you a little bit about Nina. She's the host of the top 1% charted podcast, Dear Nina, Conversations About Friendship. As an essayist and freelance writer, she's had numerous pieces published on a wide variety of topics, but she started focusing on friendship in 2014. Nina moved to writing solely about friendship in 2021. Her Substack, Conversations About Friendship, is a go-to newsletter for friendship advice, and her private Facebook group, Dear Nina, the group, has become a community where people help each other solve friendship problems and talk about books, shows, and more. And so, Nina, welcome to the program. I'm so happy to be talking with you today.
I'm really honored to be on your list of really incredible guest writers, all kinds of people in the writing industry. So thank you for having me.
So we've known each other since our mom blogging, our parenting days,
Yes.
when we both wrote a lot for Brainchild. Remember Brainchild?
Oh, yeah. That was my first major regular writing assignment. And I really loved it. It was such a nice thing because I was able to write personal essays and get paid for them regularly. I had a deadline because I did I think twice monthly column there for a long time.
Yes. And I remember we had such a community. I think that was my first experience after Listen to Your Mother that I was in New York City to find a community. And it was also a lot of people who had been involved in the Blogger community, which I was also a part of. It was like the mid days of mom blogging. And back when you and I both wrote about parenting a lot, we really don't that much. The last time I wrote about parenting was really when I wrote for Shondaland about my hearing loss and dealing with my daughter. And I actually spoke on your program about that.
That's right. I can tell you the last time I wrote about parenting because it very much connects to why I started writing about friendship. And it was way back also in the Listen to Your Mother time where I was in the Minneapolis cast. And well, I guess I wasn't the last time I wrote about parenting, but it's connected to it. I did an essay out loud, obviously, for people who have not been in Listen to Your Mother. It's a written piece that you then perform. It's a spoken essay kind of experience. So you now have this piece that has been written out that you can get published somewhere, because when you're doing a performance, the performance production doesn't necessarily own that piece. Well, they might, but obviously each case is different. I'm just thinking about your audience that has these opportunities to publish. So I had the rights to this essay. I then sent it to Brainchild, which is what got me the column at Brainchild. Much later, I'd say months and months and months later, I don't even think the person was at the show. I think they saw the YouTube version of that essay. She came to pick me up at my house for a walk, and my son answered the door. The essay had been about my son and about how he completely botched his piano recital. It was a humorous piece. So in Listen to Your Mother, people do sad ones or funny ones. This was a funny one. And he was young, maybe he was 10, but it was about how he really triumphed at the end, but still in the story, he messes up 10 times or so. And so my friend says, oh, I loved your mom's piece about your piano recital. And he looked at me dead in the eyes and he's like, you wrote about that? And I'm thinking, not only did I write about it, I performed it in front of 700 some people. It's on YouTube. And my column in Brainchild had already been going for a while. I think it was nearing its end just because, they like to have fresh writers. They themselves as a magazine might have been nearing its end as well. I was like, I don't really want to be writing about my kids. I have 4 kids and he was the oldest. And so I'd already written about a lot of, not necessarily him in particular, but parenting milestones. I had 3 kids after him. It's like, how long am I going to do this for? Am I going to just keep talking about the same stuff? I was ready to do something else. And so that was kind of the end of the parenting
So
genre
how did
for
you
me.
get to the friendship writing? Because that's a whole different segue.
Yes. And I had been writing about a variety of things. I've been doing book reviews. I'd written a lot of religion pieces for different, mostly Jewish outlets and parenting. And I'd written some friendship pieces for different places. And I'd written an essay in particular for 2 editors that were doing an anthology about friendship at the Her Stories Project. I'd gotten to know these editors. I'd helped them a lot with their blogging knowledge back in the day too. I would think I was a bit of a mentor to them when they had come after me in the blogging world. And I'd written a few other friendship things. So I think that they were like, hey, it would be fun if you would be our friendship advice columnist. They were doing a website to go along with this anthology all about friendship. And I was like, oh, I love that idea. I'd written a Twitter advice column for Writer on Box. Do you remember Writer on Box? It's still around. It's a really, really good website for writers, all kinds of things, fiction, nonfiction advice for writers. And I was a very early adopter on X, Twitter. Obviously, it was Twitter at the time. And I'd written an advice column every month for them about how to use Twitter. I'm talking 2010, 2011. Okay, this is back in the day. I also wrote baby name advice for Caveller, which is a Jewish parenting site. And so I would write.
I wrote for them, yeah.
I love that. And so people would write in like, okay, my oldest is named such and such. We need to name after this person. What should the name be? And I would write full answers. They paid me to write baby name advice. It was so much fun. So that advice voice was something I already really enjoyed and already been paid for, which was wonderful. Then when they asked me to do the friendship advice, I was a little nervous at first because I'm not a therapist, not a social worker. I'm starting to claim it 10 years later now, but at the time I didn't really claim being an expert. And I felt funny about it. And they really helped me out. They were like, we're going to just lean into that. We're going to make it, you're just a regular person with an odd obsession, which is true, about friendship. A lot of people care about friendship. I think I care about it extra. I just always loved this topic. But at that time, when they hired me, it was 2014, I was still writing about all these other things. And they kept me for 4 years. And then they changed the focus of their website. They moved on to just general midlife, all kinds of essays, all kinds of topics. And I was like, I still want to just write about friendship. And they very generously, kind of back to the idea of copywriting your material or whatever, they very generously let me keep all my material. So I moved it all to my own website. They kept it on theirs too. I'm sure there's SEO issues with that, but neither of us are the New York Times. It was fine. So I was able to take everything I'd written for 4 years, move it over to my own website. But Estelle, this is where I got into kind of an issue, is that my site never had a name having to do with friendship. It was just Nina Badzin, my name.com. Always. I never had a cutesy name. Even back in the mom blogging days, I never, ever had a cute name. I thought about it and I always saw all these other cute names. And my really close friend, Jill Smokler from Scary Mommy, like those are the kind of names, like I was like, oh, I need a cool name like that. And I never could think of one. And it was sort of prophetic.
I had one. Mine was Musings on Motherhood and Midlife.
Yes, I remember that from you. And I think, do you still have an email address with that or something? Like it's hard
No more.
Okay.
No. I didn't keep the URL. The URL transferred to EstelleErasmus.com, but I kept the Twitter handle because if you leave your Twitter handle, somebody else can take it. If people are leaving X, just keep your handle, otherwise someone can take it.
Yeah, smart, especially if it's your name. Like that would really be disturbing. So It kind of worked out that I just kept it my name, but it was still nothing to do with friendship. But I had not decided yet in 2018 when I put it all on my own site to just write about friendship. I was kind of doing all the things still. And then as time went on, pandemic hits, we're in 2020. I decided it was time, just like everyone else, probably you too, to do a podcast. I didn't start the podcast till 2021 because, as you know, there's quite a learning curve. But I was starting to put the pieces in place. But it really occurred to me, okay, if I'm going to do a podcast, it's of course going to be about friendship. I still had so much to say. By then, I'd been writing about friendship for 7 years. So I'm like, I have 7 years of material. A lot of people write me anonymous letters. That was how the column started. And I thought I would base the podcast on that. It ended up morphing away from that, which I think is, good advice for people. You may start one way and then you gotta go where the audience is, where there's energy. The letter episodes never did as well as just talking about really concrete issues. So I have now done 132 episodes. I mean, I have way more coming. But if you think about it, it's only about friendship. It's not about anything else. I mean, each episode has its own kernel of advice to give, but it's not really based on the letters anymore. I've now moved the letters that have started since 2014, but I still get tons of fresh ones. I do one of those a month for my paid subscribers on Substack. So I have a lot of Substack posts that are free, but the anonymous letters I have now moved into that paywalled content. So
That's smart. Is that working really well?
I think so, because I'm allowing myself there to really answer in a long form way that I can't do anywhere else. I don't think it works as well in the podcast. For some reason, they're too specific. It gets too detailed. I think my podcast is detailed. I'm very strict with how people pitch me for the podcast. I do like a very detailed, very small subject within friendship. Sometimes people will pitch me. I mean, this is a whole other topic. I don't know if you're ready to go there, but pitching a podcaster is something, I mean, honestly, we could do an entire episode about that. I get a lot of pitches, which is a good problem to have. Like when I started the podcast back in 2021, when it was live, I was seeking out guests. It did not take long, I'm happy to say, that it switched and people were pitching me and I was in the position. I've had to hire an associate producer now to help me sift through these pitches. And a lot of times, I mean, this, you teach people so much about how to pitch editors and how to pitch anybody. I can really see it now from this point of view. People will write me stuff like, dear Nina, I have a book about friendship, or I have a character in my book and friendship is so important. It's like the entire thesis of my show is that friendship is important. That is not a pitch for a show about friendship. What are you offering to the audience?
I completely agree. I mean, first of all, I don't take unsolicited guests. I usually reach out, I guess, because I know a lot of people, or sometimes people will recommend people that they're close with, and I'll find that I've had some connection and I like having that. I feel that a lot of times I'll get a pitch like, I own a coaching service and I'd like to be on your program. It's like, okay, no.
Right. Oh, there's a lot of off the wall ones that clearly don't even know it's about friendship. Those come from publicists sometimes. And I just can't believe somebody is paying somebody else to send me their book about, aging parents or something. You could, by the way, turn a pitch easily about aging parents into something about friendship, but the publicist has not done that. And I'm not going to do the work for them. So I just say, unfortunately, this is not a fit for my show. I have developed pitching guidelines, which I think are actually helpful for anybody pitching anything, because they really teach you how to understand that anything you have to offer has to offer something to the reader or the listener. For our case in the podcast, the listeners, no different for readers. People are not coming, at least to my show, to hear about a fictional character in a book. And so I'll put in my guidelines, this is not a book podcast. And even if you have a book about friendship, we're not going to talk about the whole book. We're going to talk about one tiny kernel of your book, because my listeners are coming for solutions to their problems about friendship. So, by the way, Estelle, advice to listeners who want to get on anyone's podcast, you don't even need to listen to all the episodes. You know how in writing guidelines, it always says, read our magazine, read our literary journal. That is good advice. And of course, it would be advice to listen to an episode. You don't even have to read the titles. Get on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening to anyone's podcast. Just glance at the titles and you can see, oh, she covers really, really narrow niche topics within friendship.
Yeah. Or even the show notes, seeing, the highlights of what's being in there. Do you have show notes?
Yes. They're not terribly detailed, because other than this associate producer who I have hired to help me sift through pitches and talk through ideas, we talk on the phone, we talk through ideas. It's such a wonderful thing. She's not on any social media. She's not techie at all. I produce and edit the show entirely on my own. And so I can't
Kudos.
really do super detailed show notes. That's the one place. I have some notes. I'll do some quotes, and obviously I'll always put the bio of the guest and where they can find on other information, but I don't go through and like bullet point to everything. My episodes are short. They're 25 to 30 minutes. People can listen.
And I like short, I think short is good. I call them the walk the dog episodes. You can walk
Yes.
the dog, take the kids to school, do whatever, take a snack break. So right now, it's so interesting that you made this pivot. You did it early. You were like an early adopter. I don't really consider myself an early adopter. I can kind of focus on trends and understand about trends, but I'm not usually the first like doing something, but I can analyze how that early something is doing. So in your early adoption, you were one of the first ones to kind of figure out a niche that worked for you and really maximize it. And in terms of the writing and the podcasting being in the top 1%, which is fantastic, you have taken that niche and kind of made it your own and imbued yourself into it, but also give really actionable advice and you cover topics from, jealousy in friendship to toxic traits in friendship. And even, to my episode where we talked about hearing loss and how that affects friendships. And it's something that so much of the population, everyone struggles with friendship. I feel it's like a life milestone situation. When you're younger, you have the people that you grew up with and you did things with. Then, ideally you go away to school or to college, and then you're making a whole new group of friends. And then you still have the friends you grew up with, but people are changing. Then when you go to a next part of life, getting married maybe, or having a partner, that's a whole different element. Starting a job, a career, you're meeting people at work. And so that's expanding. And then when you're a mom or a parent, you have the parent friends, but those are usually situational situations. Like a lot of the mom friends that I had when my daughter was younger, when she changed friend groups, I'm no longer friends with those moms. And that's okay. I think being a creative person, a lot of times you're your own entertainment. The friendships that I have, like I have some friends that are in the writing community. I have my dearest, like my closest friends are maybe not at all in the writing community at all. And they're just somebody who just see me as me, not connected to anything I've done or accomplished or am doing. It doesn't mean that they don't acknowledge my work, but they see
Well,
me
hold on.
aside.
This is a good topic actually for your audience. So, a lot of us who are in a business where we have something we're putting out, a book, articles, things on social media, even if it's just social media posts, certain kinds, a podcast, this does come up a lot where people are very upset with their friends for not acknowledging those things. So, you actually just browse by. And I just want to, this is like a good little subtopic here.
Yeah.
My friends acknowledge it. That is not true for a lot of people. A lot of people's friends don't acknowledge this part of their life. And oh boy, is that a sticky topic. And I talk about that a bunch. And I really try to turn it around and help the person not feel so bad and not necessarily cut off a friendship that does not need to be cut off. So someone will write me, I'll give you a great example. Dear Nina, my friend never likes my social media posts. I have a book coming out. It's free for them to like it. Why can't they just like a post? I'm not even asking them to read the book. I just want them to buy the book, or I at least want them to, show up to a reading. And I think we first of all have to be honest with ourselves about how much is reasonable to ask. I agree it's reasonable to hope someone will like a post. Okay, easy enough. However, for years and years and years and years, your friends are not your audience necessarily. They're not your readers. They're not your listeners. They may be, and that's wonderful. But my advice is to see that as, the candy on top of the sundae, the whipped cream, the syrup, all the extra. It would be great. But let's say your friend is a doctor, a lawyer, some other job. I mean, how engrossed are you in their job? Are you every week being like, hey, how did that surgery go? Like, it would be tiresome. You'd be like, okay, do we have to keep talking about the surgeries? You'd be tired of it. Our friends feel the same way. They do not want to talk about our books, our podcasts, our social media presence all the time. They don't. And I think we have to release them from that. And we would not be so upset at our friends if we could turn it around and be like, well, how much do I talk about their vocation? Probably not that much.
I love that. And you're making a point here. What you're showing in your answer, Nina, is empathy. You're looking on the other side. And I think when it comes to advice, sometimes we lose that other part. Like you have that ability, and that's why you're so successful in this niche that you've selected. I want to talk about one other thing that you've done that as an early adopter. Today, everyone and their mother has a book club. Everyone. You, for years, for a decade, have been writing your list of books that you've
Oh, yeah.
reviewed just solely yourself. And that's an early adopter
Thank
situation.
you for noticing that. It's like it is my thing I've been doing the longest. I don't bring it up enough. I really appreciate that. I started that in, hold on to your hat, 2011. In 2011, I started just making a list. I call it my pithy book reviews. Nobody's paying me for this. It's just something I do on my website. And a lot of times I did it just because I'm a big reader and people often would come to me for book recommendations. And I was like, who can remember what I read? I couldn't even tell you what I read 2 days ago sometimes. So I keep it on my website and I have a page for each year. And I call it my pithy reviews. They literally are 2 to 3 sentences because I personally don't like reading long reviews. And there was a period of time I was writing reviews for websites. I didn't even like writing those. I don't like reading those. Kind of the empathy thing. I try to think, what does the next person like to read? 3 sentences. Just tell me, like, was it good? And if I really hated a book, then I don't finish it. The exception is All Fours, which I just did finish and I really did not enjoy. And I did put it on my list just because I felt I had to say something. Most cases, life is just too short. I'll put a book down. Therefore, my list isn't going to have like a lot of negativity. I'm not here to like pan other writers, except in that one case, I guess. It's pretty positive, but I will not be like, oh, it was amazing if it wasn't.
This was before. I mean, like I said, every celebrity now has a book club.
Hmm.
Every publisher has a book club. That was not the case when you started this. And so you were, at one point, the only game in town when people wanted to look at reviews or, what you were reading. And I do remember getting those posts because I've been a long time subscriber.
Oh, thank you. I will say, if I can just pat myself on the back one more time, I think I was a somewhat early Substack adopter too. Certainly not the first, but I had at some point a newsletter on MailChimp, which I found really difficult to use. Like you had to basically be a pretty advanced graphic designer to like move those boxes around. And people do it. Obviously, some people are able to do it. And I did it for years, but it never looked great. Then I moved it to Tiny Letter, which was owned by MailChimp. They've since done away with that company. I did that because it was much simpler, but there were no bells and whistles. It really looked like an email. You could bold some things, you could bullet point some things, put maybe one picture. You couldn't do much, but because there were no bells and whistles, it would arrive in people's inboxes, where MailChimp and some of the other bigger ones would end up in your spam. So I was like, oh, it's easier to slide in to someone's actual inbox. But then they were going to be doing away with it. Plus, I was ready for some more bells and whistles. And I was starting to see a little bit of a switch to Substack. Just a little bit. It wasn't a lot of people, but in my circle, there wasn't a lot of people. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to try it. And wow, I hate to be like a commercial for Substack, but back to the graphic design piece, they just make it so easy. They make it
Yeah,
very intuitive to the
they
things
do.
you take for granted, like to bold things, to add pictures, to add quotes, just easy, easy. If you have your own website, it's easy. Maybe if you've never had a website, you would still have to figure that out. And there's a community there. I started that, I think, in 2022. So, a little bit after, maybe 6 months after the podcast, and I realized, okay, I need something a little fancier to go along with the podcast. So I really enjoy that over there.
I'm interested in knowing what you do for your paid subscribers because you have your regular posts and then you have either the element, you could break it down, you could say for paid only, after a public post. I don't know. It's a little complex. They have to say that it's private because if there's a private element, or you can just do a private post. How do you do that? Do you do it for both or?
Here's what I do for the paid ones. And I'm not telling you that I'm paying anyone's mortgage with my paid posts,
I get
although
it.
I do have regular paying subscribers and more all the time, which is exciting. Like, isn't that
That's
the best? I know you're on Substack too. Don't you love getting that email that says somebody upgraded? It is a little bit intimidating at first to put something behind a paywall because it's basically you saying, I have something, and you do this too. It's like,
Yeah.
I have something to teach you or tell you, and you're going to have to pay for it in a world where there is so much free content, including our own. That's confusing, right? You're putting out all this free content. There's
Yeah.
so much free content. And then
Yeah.
you still had to have the chutzpah to say, and still, I have something that is worth paying for. So you have to have like the confidence, which we just fake it till you make it. And what I do, as I said earlier, the only thing I put behind a paywall are the monthly anonymous questions and answers. But I just actually, before we got on this call, went and edited all of my paid posts and I moved to the paywall. So I used to have the paywall after the question. So you'd be able to read the question, but the answer was paywalled. Finally, I
Ah,
realized based on the headlines that it's sometimes the question people want to read too. It's like, or they stop after the question. Like they'll read the
right.
question, they're like, okay.
Okay.
That's the part they might have been curious about, even more than the answer is like, what are other people thinking that they write to me anonymously about? And I have now moved to paywall. We'll see if it works. It's an experiment. I almost will need to like text you and let you know how it goes in a couple months. I've moved the paywall to after where it says Dear Nina. That's it. You can't read the question now. You can read the headline. If you are curious about the question, I put so much time into those. I put extra time into those posts, way more time. But
That,
your paying posts, my advice, I believe, I think is good advice, can't just be because you put more time in. I know I put more time in. That's why I moved to the paywall. But the paying posts, kind of like I say when people pitch me for the podcast, what are you offering to the reader? What are you offering? It's not just that you think you spent extra time. Most people don't want extra content. They really don't. There's so much content.
no.
What are you offering?
For me, I offer some editing help sometimes for a micro memoir, and I actually have helped people get published from the work that I did. If it's something small, I could do it. I can't like do a whole essay. People pay money for my 30 years of experience
Yeah,
usually, so they're getting a little taste. And sometimes the people that work with me then transform over to working with me in a deeper way, like through my small classes that like sell out in 2 days once I announce them. Plus, I offer bonus clips from my interviews. So it's like a little bit more information about the author or the expert that then gets given to my paid subscribers. So that's what I've
that's
been
great.
doing.
I think yours is way more clear than mine. I actually am trying to work through like because like I just said, I don't think people necessarily want a lot of extra content. And that's really what mine is extra content. And so I am trying to work through what could I possibly offer. I did just put in there that I'm going to do quarterly Zooms, hangouts for the paying subscribers, but I don't
Yeah.
know if that will really work. I'm trying it. I do think in my planet of listeners, readers, there is a sense of like wanting to meet people. So I
Yeah.
don't think I'm going to use those Zooms for people to air their friendship problems because why would people do that on camera in front of other people? I don't think they would. So it has to be a little more positive. It can't be like we're here to complain about our friends. I had
Right.
to figure out what I'm doing in that Zoom, but sometimes people just want to get to know each other. I have a lot of regulars on the Facebook
Yeah.
group. I do all that for free. Like maybe they would want to get together. Well, that's going to be an upgrade.
I feel like you have to pivot with all that stuff and really just see what makes sense and what makes sense for you. And I actually like that aspect about Substack that you can pivot, you can figure it out. Like maybe I will do letters, although I see a lot of people doing like letters. And I had a column in Writer's Digest. I'm a contributing editor there. I write a lot about writing and my podcast covers it. So I don't know if letters would work for me, but maybe something else. So I'm always open to figuring out different things. I'm going to pay attention to what you're picking up because you're an early adopter. So I'm going to learn from you, Nina.
No, thank you. No, there's so much to learn from you. I mean, we're really in lockstep. I think you said a really important word, which is pivot, which is something we've both done, right? Having a podcast is just a pivot from the writing world we are part of. It's part of it, right? It's connected. There's so many people that we both once upon a time wrote columns with and different, websites that are now podcasting. Why? Because that's where the audience is. You have to pivot to where the audience is.
And for me, I don't know if you feel this, but I was a magazine editor in chief. And so for me, doing a podcast is so much like running a magazine. You're curating content, you're talking to guests, you're interviewing people, you're reading, I do close reading, and it's all about distilling and getting information that's going to be actionable, that's going to help your audience. So for me, that's what a magazine was.
Absolutely. And there's another huge element to it. The reason it feels like a magazine to you and to me, it's because we understand that it has to be edited. So you, I know, have an editor. I do edit myself because I want to at this point, but it makes sense that you don't. It is very time consuming. I'm not saying it's for everyone. Your editor who's probably listening to this is probably nodding her head. It is very time consuming. I feel like I should probably get into a little bit of podcast advice. You know, I love advice, but I'm saying maybe in my Substack or something, but that's a different audience. I really wish I could consult on people's podcasts sometimes. And maybe I should add that as a revenue stream because
Say it. You can say it in your next episode.
yeah, maybe I will. Most people's are too long. I'm going to tell you right now, I was a guest on someone's podcast and
I
she
agree.
told me, you know, oh, I don't really edit. I just put it up. Like my heart froze in my chest and I didn't really even want to do the interview. I ended up doing it, but it makes me nervous because I edit myself. I know what I sound like unedited. I know what most guests sound like unedited. And just like in reading, we don't want to read anyone's rough draft, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Advice for fiction. By the way, we didn't even talk about this, but my very, very first kind of publishing was that I used to have short stories in literary magazines, fictional short stories. And I was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Like that was my avenue for a while. I'm so glad I'm out of that world, to be honest. But even then, like when I was writing fiction, and I teach writing classes still currently, I always tell my students, we don't need all the he said, she said. Like you have to edit. No one wants the exact dialogue. Memoir, right? Like you understand this so well in memoir. It's a piece of a story. We don't literally need the whole story to have it be called true. It is true even without every single detail because you have to think about the reader. The podcast is no different. Nobody really wants to hear your entire conversation. It's an artful conversation. It's an edited conversation. And this podcaster was like, no, it's authentic. Authentic. Who can listen past 20 minutes of an authentic conversation? No, I want an edited conversation.
I agree completely. And this has been so great. And I know that you have a private Facebook group, Dear Nina. I'm going to give the links to that. I'm going to give everything on the show notes. And I have to end with a question, Nina. What kind of friend are you?
I think I'm a really good friend, but I'm not a perfect friend and I know it. But I am the friend who will show up. And I think my number one friendship superpower, we all have them. You just have to know what yours is. There's not everything. You cannot be everything. Mine is that I reach out a lot. I will never wait for you to reach out. I'll reach out the first 3 times in a row. I don't care. I'm not keeping track. It is the best thing you can do for your friendships is not keep track.
That's beautiful. I love that. And I would say I'm a loyal friend. If I'm your friend, and I'm very picky about who I let into my circle, and that includes I will let my students into my circle. I want to say that on a different level. You know, I'll be their guide and their mentor and inspirer. I have their back. I have your back. That's, I think, an important thing for me.
Loyalty is a fantastic quality.
Thank you. Well, this has been wonderful. And Nina, you're going to have to come back. We will talk about other aspects of the things that we touched on today, for sure.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.